Hello YouTube, it is I, ConrailFan76, and this is going to be another weird video. It's going to be similar to the vein of the response video I did to the Winnipeg Railfan, except it's not going to be about him, it's going to be about another YouTuber, History in the Dark. You may or may not have heard of him. Recently, he put out a video detailing the escapades of 2816 in Mexico, and its tour through Mexico. The long story short version of it is I didn't exactly like how the video was presented. I wasn't a fan of the overly dramatic narrative.
And everything went off really well. 2816 performed flawlessly, there were no major hiccups or anything, crowds adored her, everything was fine, and then she crossed into Mexico and mass chaos ensued.
And I think the video had the wrong takeaway associated with it. I rewatched the video and I started jotting down notes in a Google Doc, and today I'm going to be going over those notes. So the first point that I noted is not exactly major in the context of the grand scheme of things, but he starts off the video with,
Look, I don't mean to be that guy, but I'm gonna be that guy. There's a lot of really poor taste stereotypes, about y'all. I think you know that. I'm sure you do. And this whole situation is doing nothing to help that, and I just need you to understand this. But I want to preface this video with the simple fact that I'm not coming from a place of hate or racism or anything like that. I do not condone any behavior or attitudes related to such.
but then soon follows it up with,
If this were a group of Americans, or Brits, or Germans, or Russians, or Indians, it doesn't matter, whoever the group of people would be.
and this rubs me the wrong way. Why is it that the first thing you mentioned is you're not racist, but then you follow that up by singling out not even races, he lists off nationalities? And this is more of a minor point, if anything, not compared to this next point. He soon talks about how he thinks that the crowds in Mexico are too excited or, quote, maybe don't have rail safety, which, yes and sort of. The last time steam ran in mainline Mexico rails was 1968, though technically the last steam locomotive operations ended around 1991. Preservation in Mexico is also not as big, so to speak, here in the United States or Canada, but we'll come back to the crowd issue. The third point I noted is that he does talk about the incident where a woman was unfortunately struck and killed by the 2816. He mentions the video that was recorded of the incident. He says that he's not going to show it, but then he shows the split-second frame before disaster. That, it's understandable for use in context, but if you're going to say you're not going to show it, and then show the split-second frame before, I don't know, that seems like a yikes to me. For point number 4, it's a direct quote from History in the Dark, where he says,
But what makes it worse is that despite the fact that this happened, people still decided to act like utter morons.
we'll be coming back to this. Point number 5 is also another direct quote, and in the grand scheme of things is more of a minor grievance if anything, but he says,
Another woman almost got hit in pretty much the same way, getting too close and trying to take a picture. In her case, she only got her phone knocked out of her hand.
it's a bit of a timeline error there. This happened before the previously mentioned woman was struck and killed. Point number 6, I do not like his dramatic narrative of 2816 has escaped Mexico when he shows the clip of them highballing back north. The way it's framed comes out like this. It's more so in reality, it did what it needed to do, and that's all it really can do. It's a locomotive. It doesn't have feelings. It's an inanimate object. All it can go is just where the tracks go. Just because they're going a little bit faster, I don't think that means anything. Point number 7. He points to the Mexico leg of the tour as a terrible mistake, and pointing out proper railfan etiquette. First of all, just because of a few incidents, it does not mean a tour was a terrible mistake. Albeit, to play the devil's advocate here, the turnout for Mexico was much more than anticipated. I don't even remember there being that many people at Kansas City when I was there. CPKC underestimated how much attention would be garnered, both good and bad, for the 2816. This is the first time anyone in a very long time, if at all, has planned a rail event in Mexico this spectacular, and of course there's going to be wrinkles. It's unfortunate that someone did lose their life, but it can also be used as a learning opportunity, and indeed many lessons were learned, such as better crowd control, maybe imposing a limit up to the amount of people who can participate in events, etc., i.e. what we do here in the States. The second thing about this is, he calls them all rail fans, but in reality, you're not dealing with rail fans. You're dealing with the average citizen in a very much more safety-lax country. They don't know train types, they don't know what makes trains special, nor do they know how to properly watch a train. I doubt they even know what the term railfan is. A majority of the country is facing several economic crises and are doing a bunch of unsafe things in the first place to even survive. For example, many have train hopped to try and get across the border to escape with their freaking lives. Of course, that isn't 100% everyone, but the exceptions aren't the subject of this point. I have a best friend in Mexico, and she tells me about the differences in safety culture compared to where I live and where she lives. Though, again, not everyone is going to have the same situation presented. Also related to this point, rail safety isn't widely advocated in Mexico as it is in the United States and Canada. There's no Operation Lifesaver. As this comment on Reddit by Silvermoon88 puts it regarding the incident, the 2816 hasn't been stoned or otherwise vandalized, yet, at the time of writing this. The photos of it, with covers on the lights, numberboards, etc., are preemptive measures to keep damage from happening. Unfortunately, the situation in Mexico comes down to what I personally would call a different cultural approach to trains and railroading. Throughout much of the US, Europe, and other countries, we are often taught to stay off the tracks entirely. Not so in many regions of Mexico. You'll find lots of videos of crowds just hanging out on the tracks and treating them like any old sidewalk, barely moving out of the way of an oncoming train. Not to say this doesn't happen in the US, EU, and Canada, etc. It definitely does, but certainly far, far less often, and usually on rarely trafficked spurs or branches. Ultimately, much of Mexico just has a different relationship with the railroad tracks. It's much more casual, with less appreciation towards the dangers that exist on them. There also appears to be less enforcement of no trespassing regulations. As I understand it, policing in Mexico is a troubled story, but I don't know enough there. Some regions in Mexico have had long-standing issues with railroad vandalism, the rocks and the like. Many locomotives down there have had what we call ghetto grills put over the windows because it's such a problem and a safety hazard. We had significant issues with this, particularly in the northeastern US back in the 70s and 80s, to the point a lot of Amtrak electrics on the NEC were given ghetto grills too. Mexico still deals with this today, it's unfortunately just pretty common. Freight hopping in Mexico also happens a lot. There are many photos and videos of immigrants from Mexico and other countries to the south riding atop freight cars bound for the US border. It's just a common thing there, far more than where the 2816 has traveled in the US and Canada so far, hence the videos and photos of people climbing onto the train. Again, it's just more common down there. So, ultimately, when the word gets out a famous and historic rare steam engine is coming through, crowds form. They form in the US on big steam tours too, but there's effective crowd control at many of these, plus many folks have that don't stand in the tracks lesson deeply ingrained, helping reduce incidents. Based on video and photos from the last few days, Mexico is lacking in crowd control. Combine that with the fact that many people there don't treat the tracks as a dangerous place, and also that the general population does not consider things like train stopping distances, how wide trains are, how heavy and dangerous they truly can be, you get a recipe that unfortunately culminates in this incident. Big, uncontrolled crowds are a danger on the best of days, but a generally laxed attitude towards trains, and also a whole train, things don't end well. There will no doubt be plenty of people who explain away the why of these things. Why is that people-track relationship so lax? Why throw rocks? Why climb on board? Etc. With casual racism or classism. I couldn't begin to try and understand the real answers to those whys, as I'm not from Mexico and can't truly understand everything going on there, but I know history hasn't been kind to many people there. There is often an uptick in many forms of crime in lower income areas, and Mexico isn't known for having the best economic status and all, so perhaps that's part of it. Perhaps it is just plain and simple immaturity and stupidity. Crowds are, indeed, notoriously dumb. Maybe it's social media obsession. After all, this woman was trying to take a selfie here, a look at me sort of thing. Maybe it's a little bit of everything. Now, this brings up some greater points to talk about. Since this issue, there has been a lot of, dare I say, needlessly tasteless posts made about the lady who was struck and about the country in general. There are two things I want to say on that. The first one is, Instagram influencers exist in the United States too. Just because this happened in Mexico doesn't mean anything. Ignorance exists everywhere. And the second thing is the memes. A lot of people have been making memes about the incident, and honestly, it's disgusting. Some will try and justify them by saying, oh, 844 memes exist too. Remember when that happened? When the 844 hit that woman? That doesn't make it right, period. Save the edginess for 4chan. The final 2 points here I'd talk about is point number 8. He ends it off by saying, folks say they never want to see her go down that far ever again. It's too dangerous. I do not necessarily inherently disagree with this statement. As it stands, it was a dangerous situation presented, but I don't inherently think that this was a failure of an event. But it did help bring to light some issues, and again, many lessons were learned. Despite all the chaos and the setbacks, all in all, it proved that such an event is widely popular and can work. It just needs a lot of fine-tuning, and I don't think the sentiment of, we shouldn't send X to an event in Mexico, is a good takeaway. What the takeaway should be, and what this video should have been, but fails to be, is that we need to start turning around the safety culture and perhaps help spread more awareness for our neighbors below us. Perhaps this is something that CPKC could look into. Maybe one of the people watching this video could help get the ball rolling and helping make a difference. And finally, point 9. Despite what you may think about the deceased, or their actions, or their lack of etiquette of rail safety, no one deserves to lose their life. No one deserves to see that kind of traumatic imagery. No one deserves to lose a family member or a loved one, regardless of the circumstances. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes is true in a vacuum, but that still should not take away any empathy over a lost life. It's only part of a wider systematic problem that we outlined in this video, and that is what should be focused on. Not the fact that our beloved steam locomotive got sent down under, or the fact that, oh no, our beloved steam locomotive is in danger, we must save it. No. That's all I have to say. Oh, except this last thing. The memes.